So, our featured speaker today is Matt Johnson. Matt is a professor of wildlife habitat ecology at California State Polytechnic University at Humboldt, where he has taught since 1999. He earned a BS in wildlife at UC Davis and a PhD in ecology at Tulane University. His interests are in wildlife habitat ecology with a particular focus on wildlife and agricultural areas and other landscapes where people live, work, and play. His goal as an educator is to help students not only learn the skills necessary to become accomplished biologists, but also to foster an appreciation for how good land management practices can benefit both people and nature. And as a researcher, his goal is to answer ecological questions that offer practical information for land managers to simultaneously advance their own goals while helping wildlife as well. So, in his presentation today, we will get to learn about Matt and his team's work on evidence-based strategies for attracting barn owls, understanding their hunting behavior, and examining their effectiveness in reducing rodent populations. So, I'll turn it over to you, Matt.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Shova, for that introduction. Can you hear me okay?
Yep, you sound great, and slides look good.
Slides look good. Okay, great. Yeah. Thanks, everybody, for being here. I really appreciate it. This is a fascinating topic to me and hopefully to you as well. I think I'm particularly excited because my team and I have been continuing to study this question: can barn owls meaningfully reduce rodent pests? And we're getting more and more information to help shed light on this story, which I think is fascinating in its own right as the story of barn owls and their prey and can they help control rodents. But I also think it raises some bigger questions about how humans can not just coexist with wildlife, but potentially mutually thrive and benefit each other. And so that'll kind of be a theme I'll return to towards the end. So what I'm going to talk about today, I'll have a little bit of background and history relevant to this topic. Then I'll talk about a lot of the work that my students and I have been doing really over the past 8 to 10 years. Then transition to what we're doing right now and some of our next steps. And then there should be plenty of time at the end for questions and responses. But I'll also just invite it, if you have a question along the way, just interject and ask it, or if you're more comfortable, put it in the chat. And if Shova and Jerry, if you guys can kind of keep an eye on the chat and let me know, and if something comes up that we should address right away, just jump in. Otherwise, we can push it to the end and try to. And I want to hear from all of you as well. What are your concerns or ideas about how this topic might be relevant to you? Okay, so let's get into it. The topic really I'm speaking of is this notion of ecosystem services, right? So these are services, processes, and products that nature provides people. In particular, I'm talking about ecosystem services provided by birds. And there's been work done in the scientific literature trying to describe these and categorize them. And we can think of maybe the most obvious ecosystem services, provisioning services. Food and fiber. So we certainly use birds as a society for food and fiber, for feathers and meat. But birds also do lots of other ecosystem services, and we can consider things like seed dispersal and pollination and pest control as regulating ecosystem services. So these are processes that help the ecosystem maintain regularity. We can also think of supporting ecosystem services in terms of nutrient deposition, that is guano from birds, and then ecosystem engineering. Lots of birds are making holes in trees, and that has implications for biodiversity that might live in those kinds of forests. Nutrient deposition is maybe not a huge deal today, but some of you probably know after the whaling industry declined, but before the Haber-Bosch process, and we really figured out how to manufacture synthetic fertilizers, harvesting guano, mostly from seabirds offshore, was one of the world's largest economic activities, especially from off of South America. So Over time, my point is, over time, humans have had these complex relationships with birds, including recognizing, sometimes economically, the services that they're providing. But I don't mean to render birds just as, agents for our own benefit. They also enrich our lives, right? So these are the cultural ecosystem services. We can appreciate their aesthetic beauty. Their awe-inspiring migrations are sources of spiritual stimulation or emotional support, or at least a sense of wonder. So these are all the things that birds are providing people. But I want to focus today, especially, and given all of your background on the topic of this series, on pest control. So birds, of course, eat a variety of things depending on the species. And this is a really, really old idea. In fact, before the Green Revolution, with the advent of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides, there was an entire branch of the US government, part of the USGS under the Biological Survey, called economic ornithology. And it really had its heyday in the late 90s and late 1800s and early 1900s. And you can see from some of these publications that this was a prominent area of not only scientific research, but active dissemination and outreach, especially to farmers. And barn owls, our hero of today's story, were one of the first birds to really be recognized as a friend of the farmer, so to speak. So as this publication says from 1893, all testimony goes to show that the barn owl is one of the most beneficial of rapacious birds. But that notion the notion that birds can help control pests really faded in the middle of the 1900s and through the end of the 20th century, mostly because of the Green Revolution and especially the rise of synthetic pesticides. But more recently, starting around the turn of the century and over the last 20 years or so, there's been a resurgence in research focused on how birds and other wildlife might help control, or at least contribute to, integrated pest management, and especially agricultural systems, but also in some urban systems as well. So you can see some of the little publications here, a number of researchers, both in California and elsewhere, trying to understand where and how this might be operating. And in particular, there's been a lot of work on this bird, the barn owl. So the barn owl is a widely distributed bird. It was once thought to all be one species pretty much around the entire world. It's now been split into 3 species, with one being in Europe. That's the common barn owl, or sometimes called the Western barn owl. One in America called the American barn owl. And then the Eastern barn owl, which is in Southeast Asia. But you can see from these publications here, there's been researchers all over the world, from Chile and Argentina to Malaysia to Kenya, and then a lot of work in the Middle East in particular, and especially Israel and Jordan, studying how barn owls might contribute to pest control. But very little of that work has been done in California or the United States, at least until my crew came along. So there's a lot of research from other regions that suggests this idea might show some promise, as some of these anecdotes suggest. So we know that the presence of raptors is correlated with decreased pest activity and increased yields. That's been documented many times around the world. Enhancing natural pest control can be more cost effective than purchasing and applying rodenticides. That's been suggested in the literature. And then, of course, there's this has benefit not just for pest control, but also for if there's any product involved, so like in an agricultural setting, because of public appeal for brands that have sustainability or wildlife-friendly certifications or values and practices. So I think all of these lines of evidence kind of pointed to the idea that we really should try to understand this a little bit better, in particular in the United States and particularly in California. So that's really what my lab has been working on over the last 8 to 10 years, is trying to answer this question: can barn owls contribute to rodent integrated pest management in the United States and in particular in California? So to answer that big question, there is a series of questions that we need to answer. And so we've been pretty systematic in our research. We're trying to answer one of these questions at a time, and really try to understand this system as thoroughly as we can. So I'll kind of go through these questions during this presentation, but briefly, we need to know what they eat. We need to know how we can attract them. We need to know how many rodents they kill. We need to know if they kill enough to meaningfully make a difference, to make it, does it matter? And we need to know where and how they're hunting. And then on the practical side, we need to know how much it costs and what a person, a landowner or a farmer or a public servant can do to try to attract these birds. And then I'll close with some of the other benefits that I think barn owls can provide. All right, so throughout this talk, I'm going to be kind of telling you a story, if you will, and that's the story of what happens when most of us go to bed. So these barn owls are nocturnal. So imagine a landscape, it slowly fades to black, and then our barn owl awakens. And we're going to call this barn owl yarrow, like the native plant in California. So barn owl yarrow wakes up, stretches his back. He's roosting maybe in an oak tree, and then he silently alofts from that oak tree and flies across the farmland, and then flies to one of these nest boxes, flies to a box like this that a farmer has put up on the land, in this case in a vineyard in Napa Valley. And that's because yarrow has babies inside this nest box, and he needs to bring food to those babies. So the first question is, what the heck do these things eat? So I'm going to show a brief video here. This was a video produced by KQED in collaboration with myself and a couple of my grad students, describing barn owl diet and how we quantify and measure barn owl diet. So I'm going to start it now. Shobha and Jerry, if you can give me a thumbs up if the audio is okay. Of course, we have an ad. Sorry about that.
Scarfing down their food whole keeps barn owls moving. After all, these hungry birds gotta eat. And there are lots of little rodents to hunt. Barn owls need a hole to nest in, and when a tree isn't available, they'll use a building, or an owl box, like this one, in California's Napa Valley. Scientists keep tabs on the owls inside. Wine growers invite barn owls to raise their young in the boxes because owls are pest control machines. I mean, a barn owl family can kill about 3,500 varmints a year. They don't take them all out, but they can make a dent. They particularly like gophers, like this stunner right here. Their constant tunneling damages roots and irrigation lines. And then there's voles, which gnaw on the grapevines. This 2-week-old owl already has the hang of it. But how the heck does it keep down all that food? Well, it doesn't. Meet the owl pellet. Check out this fur ball. And here's a jaw. Gnarly. The secret to turning this into this is its stomach. It has 2 chambers. The first one oozes digestive juices, like our stomach. The second one, the gizzard, squeezes the remains with powerful muscles. The fats and proteins get absorbed. The fur and bones become tightly compacted. After about 8 hours in the gizzard, the result is one of these beauties. For researchers like Laura Chavez from Cal Poly Humboldt, pellets are forensic evidence. She carefully dissects them to find out how many pesky gophers and voles the owls took care of.
The tail still has skin on it.
This unlucky rodent had a small skull. It could be a vole. But then she examines the teeth.
The teeth are actually looking more like a gopher's.
They're kind of circular, surrounded by a white ring of enamel. And the first and second teeth are joined by a bridge. Classic gopher trademarks.
If it's a gopher, it's a very young one because this is on the small side.
Sometimes more than one carcass is crammed into a single pellet. This one had 2 gophers. Winegrowers love barn owls for their prolific appetites, but researchers still don't know whether vineyards are an ideal place to raise an owl family. Christian Cortez, a researcher at Cal Poly Humboldt, studies young owls to see how well they're growing. After covering their head to calm them down, he takes a drop of blood and plucks a feather. They will tell him if the owlet is getting enough to eat. Researchers want to know, do owls have enough open space to hunt in? And do the toxic chemicals Napa wine growers sometimes use to kill rodents end up hurting the owls too? As scientists explore these questions, we'll find out if barn owls are really getting a good deal. Hey Deep Peeps, I'm science journalist Maddie Safaya, sitting in for Laura until she returns this fall. Do you know what makes owls?
Okay. Next slide.
Such quiet.
Sorry. There we go. Okay, so yeah, that summarized some of the cool work Lauda and Christian have done to try to understand what these birds are eating. Again, a lot of this work that I'm describing has been done in Napa Valley, but we've also done some work in Sonoma County, also San Luis Obispo County, and now more recently we're working in San Joaquin County as well. But the short version is Yarrow, this owl we're thinking about, like all the other barn owls, they'll eat whatever is locally available. So in California, that usually means pocket gophers and voles being the probably prey item number 1 and 2. But they will also eat deer mice or house mice in certain settings if they're in more urban places, and then also roof rats. And one of the topics we're having interest in studying in the future is, are they eating roof rats in some of the almond orchards, which are experiencing a roof rat outbreak over the last couple of years. So they'll eat what's locally available. And again, around here, that's a lot of gophers and voles. Okay, so we know what they're eating. Now, how can you attract them? Well, like the video suggested, you can track them with these nest boxes. So we check the nest boxes like this video indicates with a little GoPro on an extendable pole. There's a mom and dad and a few eggs. We check it during the day when they're sleeping. So it's relatively non-invasive. And that gives us an idea of how many owl boxes are occupied. And we have found that over the years and depending on the region, the nest box occupancy rate just varies quite a bit, but often, in the 50-ish percentage, but maybe varying in the extremes from 25 to 75%. So a really interesting thing about barn owls is that they're what we call obligate secondary cavity nesters, which is kind of a mouthful, but that basically means they have to nest in some kind of a cavity, some kind of a enclosed space, but they can't make it themselves like a woodpecker can. So they're reliant on, human-made structures these days. In hundreds or even thousands of years ago, they would make use of huge cavities in giant oak trees or maybe crevices in rock faces, but those are fewer and harder to find, and then hence the name barn owl. They're easily attracted into barns, lofts inside barns, or very conveniently you can attract them with these nest boxes. So I'll say more towards the end about how the nest boxes should be designed and placed, but the important point is here that we know that they eat a lot of rodents, and they're eating rodent pests, and we know that they can be attracted with these owl boxes. Very importantly, we've also learned from a conservation perspective that these owl boxes aren't ecological traps. So we're not luring these birds into these owl boxes and then they're not reproducing well, or they're dying, or the chicks are suffering, or anything like that. We've studied this question carefully, and putting up an array of barn owl nest boxes can actually sustain a local owl population. Now, I will say that it's important to minimize at the least, and even better, eliminate any use of rodenticides simultaneously with deployment of nest boxes, but we can talk more about that later. Okay, so all right, we know that they eat a lot of rodents. We know we can be attracted by nest boxes. How many rodents does yarrow kill? Well, as was briefly mentioned in that video, we've quantified this. So this was work done by a former student named Dane St. George. He put video cameras on the inside of nest boxes. So as you saw just a minute ago, every time an owl brought a prey item back to feed its babies, we could count it. And so he estimated that on average, a family of barn owls, so yarrow, the dad, mom, and the kids, over the entire year, will eat somewhere around 3,500. You can think about it with our standard error here of about 3,000 to 4,000 rodents killed per year per family of barn owls. Wow. Okay, that's a lot of rodents, but of course there's a lot of rodents out there. So the next question is, are they eating enough to really matter? And the answer, at least for gophers, appears to be yes. So this was work done by Ash Hansen, and she looked at gophers in Napa vineyards that had barn owl boxes and did not have barn owl boxes. And the way she monitored gopher abundance is the open hole method. We learned this from Roger Baldwin, who's a rodent vertebrate specialist, vertebrate pest specialist at UC Davis. And we call it the open hole method. So basically you find where gophers are active and you excavate one of their holes with a vertical hole going from the surface of the ground down into the horizontal tunnel. And then they want to plug that right away because that's where air can get in and predators get in. And so if it's plugged in a 24 or 48 hour window, then that is evidence that gophers are present and active in that area. So we look at the proportion of these holes that are plugged as an index of population activity. And she found that in the absence of barn owl nest boxes, gopher activity increased by about 18% over the growing season. And then in the presence of barn owl activity, she found that gopher activity decreased, or presence of barn owl nest boxes, gopher activity decreased by about 14%. And this is really fascinating because you can see as we go from February to May, February is where we just have maybe 1 or 2 adults in the nest boxes. And then by May, that's when they have all their chicks and they're eating lots of, or killing lots of rodents and bringing them back to the chicks to eat. So that's where we really saw the greatest reduction in gopher activity. And then we also wanted to ask, is the same thing happening with voles and mice? So this was another student named Catherine Larson, and she used a different technique. She used chew blocks. So these are, maybe some of you are aware of these. These are a rodent monitoring technique. We were using the non-toxic version. They do have some versions with toxins, but we were using the non-toxic versions. And it's basically a wax block with some seeds inside it. And you can put these things out to monitor where rodents are active because they'll nibble on these wax blocks. And that gives you an indicator of where they're active. So again, she put out a bunch of these wax blocks in vineyards that had no nest boxes at all, as well as some places that had some nest boxes, but maybe not so many young, or maybe no young at all, just some adults, places where there were a few young, and then places with lots of boxes and lots of young. So we had a gradient of hunting pressure on the x-axis here, and then the population activity of voles and mice on the y-axis. And she found, just as we would expect, that indeed where the owls were most abundant and most active we had the least activity of above ground rodents like these voles and mice. We could not distinguish between the voles and mice with this study, only that these were not gophers. These were voles, above ground rodents like voles and mice. So what does it all cost? Well, I'm going to return to this towards the end where I give you some concrete recommendations about how to implement this, but we did want to examine what this costs relative to alternatives. And so we worked with an economist to come up with a way to try to quantify what this costs, both recognizing the cost of the box and the density of boxes that might be deployed in a landscape, how often they have to be serviced, how often they have to be replaced. And we can calculate that in terms of dollars per acre per year or dollars per rodent removed per year. And then we could do the same thing for trapping. If we set aside the use of rodenticides, really the two most viable ways of trying to control rodents in these agricultural systems especially, I think the same would be true in urban settings, is with natural control, like with barn owls or other predators, or with trapping. And so trapping, really, there's two types of traps. There's a Maccabee trap you see here on the right that's used for gophers, and then there's a regular old snap trap used for mice and voles. And so some of the vineyard owners, especially in Napa, when they have bad outbreaks, they are spending a lot of time and money deploying these traps. The traps themselves, of course, aren't very expensive, but it's the labor that is required to deploy and retrieve these traps. And so you can see here on the right, or excuse me, on the left, these are some photos from Ivo Jeremes. He's a lead viticulturist and winemaker with Gurgitch Hills in Napa. When vole populations are really high, they can actually gnaw on the trunks of the grapevines and kill them. And so you can see the result of all this trapping, lots of rodents killed. And then you can see some bycatch in here as well. There's a few lizards that were captured by this. So we could estimate the cost of all that trapping from Ivo's data. And what we found was the barn owl boxes are much, much cheaper than trapping, again, because of the labor costs, somewhere between 10 to 15 times less expensive, both in terms of per rodent per year as well as per acre per year. So that's really encouraging. But it's also true to be honest about how well this works. So we have some pretty good data now to model how much of the rodent population these barn owls can remove. And so what we have here is kind of a complicated figure, but it's got three different panels recognizing when rodent density is low, when rodent density is high, and when, or medium, and when rodent density is high. So rodents population cycle, especially the voles. So in some years, vole abundance will be extraordinarily high, and then in other years, quite a bit lower. And then what we have on the x-axis here is the investment, cost per acre, which basically comes down to how many nest boxes have been deployed. And then on the y-axis, we have efficacy, which is the percentage of the rodents that are removed. And then we have two colors here for gophers and then mice and voles. And the basic story is, or there's two stories maybe to show here. And the first is that the more you invest, the cost per acre, the more boxes you put up, the higher the efficacy, right? The more rodents that are getting removed. That's pretty understandable. But the other thing to recognize here is that the efficacy of the owls diminishes as you go left to right amongst these three panels. So with low rodent years and a decent, modest to higher investment, the owls themselves can be removing most or nearly all of the rodents. But when rodent density is higher, the owls are going to be removing a smaller percentage, maybe 50 to 70% or so. And then at very high rodent densities, the owls are helping. They're removing maybe up to 25, 30% of the rodents, but they're not going to be able to keep up. So this would be a time when some other method would need to be also implemented. So that's our general recommendation for farmers, is to use owl boxes to maintain lower numbers in most years and then trap when rodent populations erupt. Okay, so we've learned a lot about what these owls are doing. And the work that we're doing now, though, is trying to better understand exactly where they're hunting and how they're hunting. So this is some of the most exciting stuff that we're doing and I'm really happy to share it with you. And so we've been doing this work, as I said, in Napa, and also in San Joaquin Valley near Lodi, and then also down in San Luis Obispo. And so we're monitoring about 500 owl nest boxes now. We monitor them from March to July. And the latest work involves GPS tracking. And so that's what I want to describe to you now. So over the last couple of seasons.
Can I just interject real quick with a couple questions that came in?
Sure.
Related to the cost savings that you had described. One is if that was an annual cost.
Yes. Yeah, this is cost per acre per year.
Okay, great. And then the other one is the cost being estimated for vineyards and farm habitats only?
Yeah, right now, although really the costs are essentially the same, because the costs are just the cost of the box, the cost of the deployment, of the cost of the box, and then the cost of the maintenance and eventual replacement. So that's pretty independent of the landscape. Yeah, good questions.
Yeah, and William, I saw you had your hand up. Was that a question or was it to flag the questions in the chat?
Oh, thanks.
It was just to flag the questions. Yeah, not a question.
Great. All right.
Great.
Go right ahead, Matt. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Happy to answer anything along the way. Thank you for interjecting. Yeah. So really exciting stuff. We're doing this GPS tracking of these owls now. So the way we do that is with a little backpack. So they have these little GPS trackers. There's a lot of different kinds of GPS telemetry devices that we put on wildlife these days. The owls weigh somewhere between maybe 500 to 800 or 900 grams, so a pound and a half to up to not quite 2 pounds. So they don't weigh much, and there's strict regulations on how much extra weight you can put on them. It needs to be less than 3%. So the technology is getting better and better and better, but at this stage, the battery technology is such that the only types of tags we can put on these birds reliably and get the data that we're really trying to get are what are called store on board tags. So the data, it's taking a location every second. So we get really detailed information about where they have been. But the data is stored on the tag. It's not like it can send it to the cell network or a satellite or anything. So we have to retrap the bird and get the backpack off of the bird. So we put them on with little backpacks. Here you can see Yarrow, our friendly owl here. Here's the backpack, and then there it is, just right in the center of the back. It's got 2 little loops that go around the wings. And what we've been doing the last couple of years is putting these tags on them for a short period, just for a week or so, to really try to understand when they have chicks, when they're actively hunting, where they're hunting the most. And so, as I said, the GPS are taking locations every second, but then they also have an accelerometer in them, like you have an accelerometer in your phone. That's how it counts how many steps you've taken. So it measures fine scale acceleration, which can tell you a lot about the activity and motion of the animal. And it collects those data actually 50 times a second. So it's really detailed information. And we're trying to use all that information to evaluate fine scale movement, so exactly where they're going and what they're doing, and ultimately trying to understand where they attack and hunt, where they're hunting and attacking prey. And then faded out here is the third question. This is what one of my students, Lauren Jackson, is really focusing on. I won't talk about that much today, but if there's questions, we can get to it a little bit. She's looking at, it's clear not all owls are the same, just like not all of us is the same. And so there's some personality differences, and we're trying to understand if that relates to some of their hunting behavior. So here's Yarrow, our bird in question. That's a male barn owl. There's Lauren Jackson, who's been doing a lot of this work the last year or so. And we had a live nest cam last year in the Lodi area. We're hoping to get it rolling again as well. So keep your eyes out for that if you're interested. So the way we trap the barn owls is like this. So you can see here the barn owl nest box. And then we attach this trap to the outside of the box. We call it a patio trap. And basically, it's a little black chute that the owl has to walk through to get into the nest box to feed its young. So it arrives. This is literally Yarrow himself arriving with a vole. He walks through that box. When he walks through it, he steps on a treadle, and that releases the door that then shuts behind him. And then the camera made this look like it's during the day, but it's actually at night. And so when the door shuts, a little light turns on. And so we're parked a quarter mile away or whatever, and we can see the light turn on to know that the door shut, and hopefully we caught a bird, so we climb up there and pull it down. And then we attach the GPS tracker. So what does it look like? Well, we get these amazing maps, these little spaghetti strands of where the birds are hunting, or where they're flying anyway, where they're moving. And again, these are data from the Lodi area, but we've done this also in Napa and San Luis Obispo. So pretty cool. Let's focus here on Yarrow, this bird in question. Here's Yarrow. And this is where he hunted and spent time just during a single night, just as an example. And so here is his nest box, this little green dot. We call it Viz 1 because it's right next to the Lodi Wine Visitor Center, conveniently. And then you can see these tracks of where he spent time. And each little dot is a GPS fix. We've sort of downsampled it down to 10-second intervals to make it a little easier to depict. And then you can see where he kind of hung out in some place for a while and other places where he's going quickly, moving quickly. And so we can use some sophisticated statistical modeling to separate those movements into different types of behavior. So we can see places where he stayed more or less motionless for a long time. So those are perching points. And we can see places where he was flying very quickly and straight. Those are commuting flights, often to and from the nest box. And then we can see depicted in 2 shades of blue here, different types of hunting. Sometimes doing really area restricted hunting, so flying very slowly and making lots of turns. And then other times flying a little bit faster, but still much more slowly than when he was commuting. And so it's those hunting locations that we're the most interested in. So we extract those hunting locations, and we can really try to understand what they're doing. It's also important to recognize that, as I've kind of alluded to, not all owls are alike. We're looking at Yarrow here. This is what Yarrow did one night, and that's Yarrow. So he spends a fair bit of time perching, a lot of time hunting, and a little bit of time commuting. But you can see all these other owls. Some birds spend even more time perching and even less time hunting. So it does depend. They have different strategies and different personalities. But we're most interested, as I said, in those hunting locations. So we can extract those. And that's what we've done for all the birds. So we extract all these hunting locations. And then where it really gets interesting is seeing where they're hunting, right? So we can overlay those hunting locations and those hunting paths on top of a land cover map, and we can see how much time they're hunting in different habitats. So here you can see overall, at least in this study in Lodi, the birds are hunting most of the time in the vineyard. So over 50% of the time they're hunting in vineyard. Though these boxes were all in vineyards, so that's what we were doing the study in, so that was good to see. But they're also hunting in pasture and grass, a little bit in orchard, and so on. But again, we see a lot of individual variation in that. So we can look at Yarrow. Here's Yarrow again, our favorite little owl. He's spending most of his time in the vineyard in that purple color, but then some other time in some other habitats. And so that's where he is on this map, or this plot over here on the right. Spends most of his time in the vineyard and less time in the other habitats. But you can see some other birds are spending most of their time hunting in pasture and grass and less time hunting in vineyard. So again, lots of individual variation, which is really fascinating. And we've done similar work, as I said, in other places. This is data in Napa Valley. And again, each vertical bar here is an individual. Here we have females on the top and males on the bottom. And again, they're sort of ordered in how much time they're spending in vineyards. So these birds on the right are hunting a lot in the vineyard, and the birds on the left less so. What's fascinating here is we have some individual pairs tagged, so the male and female associated with the nest. And so here's one, for example, from Gurgich Hills Vineyard in Napa, and both the mom and dad, mom on top here and dad below, were spending most of their time hunting in the vineyards. But you can look at a different pair of birds, like this pair at the Bouchain Vineyard, where the female was doing most of the hunting in the vineyard and the male less so. But I will say on average, it's the males that do the most hunting. So this is an important point about barn owls. The males are the super dads. They do probably 60 to 70% of the hunting to feed the nestlings. So they're really the ones that are probably the most responsible for any sort of pest management. So the next thing that we're trying to understand is exactly where they're attacking prey. So the data I gave you a moment ago is telling us where they're hunting based on the GPS locations. But as I mentioned, the GPS tags also have these accelerometers in them. And these accelerometers are really nifty little devices. So they measure three sources or three vectors of acceleration in an XYZ plane. We call them heave, surge, and sway. So if something goes abruptly upward or downward, that's positive or negative heave. Abruptly forward or back, that's positive or negative surge. And abruptly left or right, that's positive or negative sway. And so we can look at these data and identify when they strike prey. Because there's a very significant heave acceleration when they land on anything, just when they're landing on a nest box or a telephone pole, but a much, much stronger acceleration and higher force if they're attacking prey. And so this is work that we've collaborated with some scientists in Switzerland that are also studying barn owls, and they've developed an algorithm to identify, based on the accelerometer data, when the birds are attacking rodents, which is super cool. So every time Yarrow attacks, we see this signature in the accelerometer data, and then because we have GPS locations going every second, we can align that time with where they are on the landscape. And so this is some work done by Kevin Garcia Lopez, a graduate student down at San Luis Obispo. And so here's one example of a bird here. Here's the nest box up here in the top left. And the bird is flying out, looking for prey, flying kind of slowly. Each of these dots is a few seconds apart, I think 10 seconds apart in this case. And then it kind of wanders around here a little bit. And then we get the acceleration data indicating that it struck prey. And then shortly thereafter, it makes a much faster flight right back to the nest box. So it's bringing that prey item back to feed its nestlings. So with this work, we're able to put like X's on the map, skulls and crossbones on the map of where these owls are killing prey. And that's really what we're most excited about next, is trying to better understand exactly where they're hunting. Are they hunting in the middle of the vineyard? Are they hunting in the edges? Are they going into urban or peri-urban environments? Are they hunting around the barns or the visitor centers? Where are these places where they're spending most of their time attacking? All right, so as I foreshadowed a little earlier, I do want to, oh, go ahead. Is there a question? Oh, maybe not. Okay. Well, if there is, just hang on to it, and I'll certainly address it at the end. But as I mentioned, I want to return this to some practical advice of what it costs and what you can do as a practitioner or a landowner or as a consultant or as a pest advisor. So let's zero in on this. So the short version is you can put up a nest box. As I mentioned, these are obligate secondary cavity nesters, and so they will be attracted to a nest box. But there's a lot of different nest boxes out there, and we've studied this question pretty carefully, and we've learned that some are better than others. So I've depicted here maybe three of the most common designs. There's a plastic design that some of you may have seen. And then there's most of them are wood if they're not plastic. And the wood designs, there's all kinds of designs. There's kind of a cottage industry of people that make and sell nest boxes. Some people make them themselves. But I would say there's kind of two dominant designs. One is this one in the middle, which is about 16 inches high. And then the one over here on the left is larger, about 24 inches high. And this one on the left also has these heat shields built onto it. And what we've learned is that the occupancy is highest for nest boxes that are at least 3 meters off the ground, so 10 feet plus. Really, from the owl's perspective, it's the higher the better. We find a more or less a linear relationship. The taller the pole, the higher the probability of occupancy. But you have to balance that with the cost and inconvenience of servicing the box, putting it up there. So we recommend anything from 10 to 16 feet or so off the ground, I think is going to be good. Metal poles are best because predators are far less able to climb metal poles than wooden poles, but wooden poles are okay too. I wouldn't recommend putting the boxes directly on trees. For one, the owls don't like that as much. And then secondly, and maybe the reason why the owls don't like it as much is because predators can far more easily get into those boxes. But importantly, this second bullet point here, the owls strongly prefer the boxes that are 24 inches tall over the boxes that are 16 inches tall. And again, those are the two common designs. There's everything in between, but try to get the boxes pretty tall. Unfortunately, that does mean they are going to be a little bit more expensive. And there is very clear evidence that the birds prefer the wooden boxes over the plastic ones. I will say these are all preferences. Birds will use whatever they can in some cases, but when we've done these studies side by side, put boxes side by side, and they'll choose the wooden one over the plastic one. If there are no wooden boxes available, we do see pretty high occupancy rates sometimes in the plastic ones, but their preference is clearly for wooden. And then this fourth bullet point here is very important too, and that is that the nest box occupancy rate is higher when there are some uncultivated habitats, natural habitats nearby, especially grassland and oak savanna. So barn owls are really kind of open country birds. They like it open. They want some grassland nearby or oak savanna. They don't like a lot of closed canopy forest nearby. And they also will use nest boxes that are associated with buildings, but in terms of like full urban habitat, at least when we've studied them in Napa and San Joaquin County, the proportion of the a mile or so radius around the nest box that is urban, that variable is negatively associated with occupancy rate. So the more urban environment around them, the less likely the box is to be occupied. Again, that doesn't mean that they don't occupy boxes in urban environment. We have a lot of boxes that we've monitored in Sonoma County, many of which are in people's backyards, and those can be occupied. But the probability is lower there than if it's out in the middle of a grassy field, for example. Another point I should probably mention is this figure here on the left suggests, so this is depicting two different scenarios. The nest box is in the middle, the top one is occupied, the bottom one is not occupied, and the different colors are depicting different land color types, or land cover types, excuse me, vineyard and grassland and so on. The owls will hunt pretty far away from the nest box. As you saw in those tracks by Yarrow, he commutes to and from the nest box, but he'll sometimes fly like a mile or two from the nest box. So they will fly to wherever prey is abundant. And that's something that's been a little tricky to communicate sometimes with landowners, because, the landowner will say, well, I've got a big rodent problem in this field over there, so I want to put all the boxes over there. Well, that might be true, and that might increase the probability that those boxes get occupied. And if there really are rodents there, a high abundance of rodents there, the owls will hunt there. But the owls are going to hunt where they want to hunt. And they might even hunt on your neighbor's property more than your property. So this is one of these collective good situations. What works the best for a region is for multiple landowners to have nest boxes, because this really is kind of a shared ecological service or ecosystem service across the landscape. Okay, so more practical recommendations for the boxes themselves. The boxes should protect the owls from predators, from heat stress, and allow for easy maintenance. So a lot of the boxes have a design something like this, where they have the entrance hole off to one side, and then a partial wall on the interior of the nest box. And this can be good to shield the nestlings from inclement weather, but also if a raccoon or a hawk or something, which might not be able to fit through the hole, it tries to reach in to get the babies, they won't be able to reach around this partial wall. And then it's very important to have some kind of a hatch or access point where you can get in there to clean out the boxes, which I'll say more about in just a moment. As I said, it's best to have them installed on poles, especially metal poles. Grooves can be handy on both the inside and or outside of the nest box next to the entrance to allow the adults to cling onto there pretty well, and also for the nestlings to get out when that time comes. It's best to have the hole towards the top of the box for a number of reasons, one of which is there'll be nesting debris, I'll just call it that, that accumulates in the nest box over time. And if that builds up to be multiple inches, 6 or 8 inches, then the chicks could actually fall out of the hole before they're really ready to fly. So it's best to have that hole pretty close to the top of the box. It's also good to have holes for ventilation. And then I think maybe the next one says something about heat shields. Yeah. So in the very hottest area, it can be helpful to have another piece of wood, especially if it's separated by small spacers on top and or side of the box to operate as kind of a heat shield. Okay, so you can build or buy these things. We have some designs that we think make a good high quality nest box that we've put online. Here's a QR code for that. We collaborate with the Wild Farm Alliance to maintain that site. And then here's some other links to other places that have PDFs of nest box design drawings, so you could build your own. And it costs, they're substantial. They have the hinges. They need to be high quality plywood. They need to have some interior bracing. They need that interior wall. There's some grooves. There's the holes and so on. So we estimate they cost about $300 to build. They need to be installed on a pole as well. Or you can buy them. And there's a number of different vendors, but again, you have to be careful. I do think the wooden ones are better than the plastic ones. I also think the 24-inch tall boxes are better than the 16-inch tall boxes. So two places that I know that sell high quality boxes are Sonoma Wildlife Rescue, as well as Napa Wildlife Rescue. And they have programs they call BOMP, B-O-M-P, for Barn Owl Maintenance Program. And they charge, I think, right around $500 per nest box. And they'll do the whole installation for you too, if you're interested in that. But let me say a few more things about occupancy. So one of the things that we're trying to develop now for farmers, we've got this already in place for Napa, and we're hoping to be doing this for San Joaquin County and San Luis Obispo County next. And that is to make a little user-friendly app that can inform landowners the likelihood that a nest box might be occupied on their property. So here's a little QR code for it if you're curious. But when you pull this up, it's this little app and you can type in an address. So for example, if you were at the Honig Vineyard and Winery, you could type that in, and then the app will zoom to that property. And then you can do like a long click with your finger on the map, just like it's a Google map or something, and then it'll come up with, like you see here at the bottom of the screen, the probability that a nest box is going to be occupied in that area, assuming it's a high quality nest box. So the probability that a nest box gets occupied is, as I mentioned earlier, affected by the landscape. So if there's a lot of grassland and oak savanna nearby, then that's going to boost the probability that that nest box gets occupied. If there's a lot of closed canopy forest or urban habitat, that's going to diminish the probability that the nest box gets occupied. So we call this a decision support tool. So this can be helpful for landowners to decide if the investment is worth it. And we're, as I said, hoping to develop this for other areas as well. Okay, maybe the last topic to get to in terms of the practicalities of deploying and maintaining these boxes is the cleaning and maintenance. So they don't take a lot of work, but they do take a little bit. And so you do have to recognize that it's not just deploy this thing, hope it goes well, and forget about it. There is a commitment of time and money and proper installation and maintenance. So we recommend that you inspect the boxes yearly in the non-breeding season. Really, that needs to be late summer to fall, so like August, September, October. And you should certainly fix normal deterioration, check the hardware. We've got lots of examples of, boxes starting to fall apart, chicks sometimes falling out far too early. So screw them back together, fix the hinges, whatever that takes. And then there's the debris inside. So all owls actually don't build nests. They make do with a nest in some other way. So for example, great horned owls will nest in a big giant stick nest, but they don't carry sticks into the tree to build the nest. They'll just take over a big stick nest from somebody else, maybe a previous year or maybe even during the active year, like a crow nest or a raven nest or a red-tailed hawk nest. And barn owls are the same way. They don't carry grass and sticks into the nest box and make a nice little bed. Instead, what they do is they just cough up those pellets that you saw in that video and stamp on them until it kind of becomes a layer of debris. And then the whole breeding season, all the nestlings inside there, which can be 3 to even 7 or 8 nestlings, are pooping and coughing up those regurgitated pellets the whole season. And they're stomping on them. And so that really builds up this nesting debris. Again, I kind of euphemistically call it nesting debris. That builds up over time. And so you do want to clean that out. But there's a wrinkle to that, which I'll say more about in the next slide. But let me also dispel some details or dispel some myths about the barn owls. They're really fantastic animals, absolutely gorgeous critters. Yarrow is like a angel as he's flying over the vineyard eating the rodents. And the beautiful white of the males are whiter than the females. They're just spectacular animals. And their feathers are so soft. They fly silently. So they have this amazing, almost ethereal reputation. But I tell you what, inside that nest box, it's a hell scene. It's a different story inside the nest box. And in particular, for this reason, barn owls have a reproductive strategy called asynchronous hatching. So that means, like most birds, they lay eggs on a regular sequence. So if you've ever raised chickens, you might know that some breeds will lay once a day or every other day. Barn owls lay their eggs every other day. And the whole clutch is usually 7 to 9 eggs or so. So they're laying an egg every other day. So it can take, 14 to 18 days to lay all 7 or 9 of them. But they start incubating as soon as the first one is laid. And the incubation time is about 31 days, 1 month. So the eggs hatch in the same sequence that they were laid. And so as the chicks are aging, you have this big age gradient. You have the oldest chick that could be 2 weeks or more older than the youngest chick. And that makes a huge difference in their size. And this is a strategy that barn owls have. Other owls or other birds have the same strategy to take advantage of unpredictable food supply. So if it's a really good year, they'll feed all the chicks. And if it's a bad year, they'll focus on just a few of the chicks, usually the oldest chicks. And then when that happens, the oldest chicks, well, the youngest chicks usually die of starvation, and then the oldest chicks will eat most of those younger chicks. So again, inside the nest box is a gruesome scene. And that's relevant if any of you ever down the road, are doing outreach and getting into a nest box with kids present or anything like that, or the public present. We have to be careful about this with the live nest cam as well. These aren't people in little owl costumes. These are wild animals that have evolved to have a particular strategy that works for them. So I say all that to also get to the point that when it's time to clean these things out, you need to be properly protected. So you need to wear an N95 mask minimally and goggles. But when we clean them out, we usually wear a Tyvek suit with goggles and an N95 mask. But as I say in this, I guess it's the third bullet here, when you clean everything out, what we are now suggesting, based on some new research that I'll say more about in just a moment, is you leave behind a thin layer of that nesting debris. And then I'll also point out that both the Napa Rescue and Sonoma Wildlife Rescue have a service. You can pay them to clean your boxes out if you're interested. And there's probably other services like that elsewhere in the Bay Area. So we got interested in this nesting debris and whether the owls are using it to decide which boxes to nest in. So we did an experiment where we cleaned boxes out that had old nesting debris inside them, and we did this to about 70 nest boxes, half of which we completely cleaned out and replaced with wood chips, which is previously the standard practice. The other half we cleaned out and replaced just with some of the debris itself. And what we found is that the boxes that had that old nesting debris were more likely to be occupied in following years. So we think that the birds are actually using the presence of nesting debris to decide which nest boxes are best. And this is not really surprising, right? If you go to a city and you're trying to decide what's the best restaurant, what do you choose? The one with the empty parking lot or the one with the full parking lot, right? We use social cues to indicate where we should go and lots of other decisions we make. And owls are doing the same thing. So they're using social cues from owls that have come before them to indicate which boxes might be best. So when you clean them out, leave a thin layer of that stuff. Okay, well, I'll begin to just wrap up here and say that I think we have some pretty strong evidence now to suggest that barn owls can meaningfully reduce rodent population sizes in places. But I think it's also important to recognize that these birds can do more than that. And so as this quote from Aldo Leopold says, when the landowner does, when the land does well for its owner and the owner does well by their land, when both end up better by reason of their partnership, then we have conservation. And so I began this talk talking about ecosystem services, the products and processes that nature provides that help humans. And that's certainly a useful way of framing these ideas, but it's also pretty transactional. And so some of you might be familiar with this book, Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She's a plant ecologist and a member of the Potawatomi Nation at a university in New York near Syracuse. And she describes these same processes, ecosystem services, as gifts, which I think is maybe a better way to think of it. And they're gifts from the earth and from each other, from the earth to us and from us to the earth. And that establishes a different kind of relationship. So when I talk to farmers now, I often try to frame it that way. The barn owl boxes are something you can do to help this bird. This is a bird that is declining throughout the world, including in the United States. This is a bird that is a secondary obligate cavity nester. It needs cavities to nest in. So you can do something good for the owls. And then the owls are going to do what owls do, and that is eat lots of rodents. And so, and that's probably going to help you and or your neighbors as well. So I think you can kind of think of it as this kind of gift economy where both can mutually thrive. And so with that, I'll be happy to take some questions. You can follow us on Instagram. We have calpolyhum.barnells, and then also my lab, which does some other research at johnsonlab.humboldt. And there's a QR code for some of the documents and links and videos that we have related to Barnells. And I'd be happy to take some questions. Thanks so much.